post the murder of Imam al-Hussein all the way until the family went back to Medina. And let us just keep that in mind. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين. السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله وعلى الأرواح التي حلت بفنائك. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين. On the eve of Ashura, the family of Ahlul Bayt were together. There was Hussein, and there was Abbas, and there was Ali al-Akbar, and there was Qasim. And Sayyidah Zainab and the family and the women and children sat there in the vicinity of everybody else. They saw them, they communicated with them. They knew something big is happening next day, but the family was together. And the person protecting the tents were Ahlul Bayt and their companions. And Abbas alayhi salam, his role in the middle of the night was to look after them, would just keep guard around the tents, just to make sure that the family was safe. Then the day of Ashura broke. Then the bodies were returned one after the other, mutilated, killed, including Ali al-Akbar coming back in pieces, including Abbas, and him being killed before he could get back and return and bring the water to the family, including Abdullah al-Radhi', the 6-month-old, who was brought back covered in his own blood, and including Hussein. And so once Imam al-Hussein was in his dying moment, the Sayyidah Zainab went to Imam Zain al-Abidin, asked him what is happening. And then moments later he asked her to lift the corner of the tent so he could have a look. And then he told her, Amma, prepare to be a prisoner of war. I could see the severed head of Hussein on a spear. And then once Hussein was killed, the armies moved towards the tents of Hussein. They moved to attack the women and children. Now there is no army to protect them. And so the horses and the men headed towards those tents where the family and children are. And they looted the bodies of those who have been killed and looted those who are alive. So the women and children of Hussein, of Ahlul Bayt, were running around with thugs chasing them, trying to steal whatever they wore. Some of the girls that were wearing earrings were ripped, their ears were ripped because they pulled them. And then others, whatever that was valuable was taken from Ahlul Bayt, and they were just running scared. Then the army, Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad, and the army they were given orders to burn the tents of Hussein. And so when they came in to burn the tents, they ran towards Imam Zain al-Abidin and Sayyidah Zainab asked him, what do we do? And he said, Amma, run into the desert. And the children of Hussein ran into the desert while they were burning the tents of Hussein, and they were screaming, burn the tents of the aggressors, referring to Hussein. A historian by the name of Hamid ibn Muslim, who was there on the day of Ashura, says this guy was kind of observing. He wasn't on either side of Hussein or his enemies. He was watching what is happening. He says, I see a little girl running out of the tent of Hussein into the desert, running towards nowhere, and her clothes had caught fire. So I ran after her trying to put out the fire because she would burn. She thought I was chasing her to loot her. So she kept running and I kept running after her, and I said, just stop. So when I stopped her and helped her out, put out the fire, she asked me, Uncle, are you with us or against us? I said, I'm neither with you nor against you. Who are you? She said, the daughter of Hussein. He identified himself, said, "Can you do me a favor, uncle?" Said, "What?" She said, "I know in this vicinity we have a grave nearby." He's referring to the grave of Imam Ali in Najaf. Saying, "I know we have somewhere to go, a sanctuary. Can you tell me the direction so I can run that way?" He told her. He told her daughter, "It's very far away. You'll never make it there." And he tried to calm her down and take her back to the tent. All she's heard is there is somewhere she can go and there is nowhere else to go. And then on the day of Ashura, Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad, for all the bodies that were on the ground, for their heads to be severed, they went round and severed all the heads of Ahlul Bayt and the companions and sent them to Kufa. They left them bodies without heads on the ground, slain on the lands of Karbala. And then he buried, Amr ibn Sa'd buried his soldiers on his side and left the others there on the ground. For 3 days they were left there without burial, without respect. So after that day, you can imagine the role of Sayyidah Zainab, collecting those women and children. She was entrusted by Hussein to look after the family, to bring those back, and she spent a good part of the night searching for them, going to the battlefield, finding them, finding those loved ones who might have been lost, the kids, the children, the women, to bring them back to their tents, to find them. On her return late at night, she saw a couple of soldiers next to the tents of Hussein, the tents that weren't burnt, the others that remained. She asked them, "Who are you? What are you doing here?" They said, "We have been ordered by Amr ibn Sa'd to provide protection for you." And she looked at them and said, "Last night it was Abbas. So after Abbas, now we get you thugs to protect us at night. Protect our tents." And then historians say that Zainab that night had no energy left. She prayed her night prayer sitting down. She was exhausted and she knew she had a day ahead of her to be taken as a prisoner of war towards Kufa and to be humiliated. So on the 11th day, Ahlul Bayt were being put on camels to be dragged in the most humiliating way back to Kufa. Kufa was the capital of their grandfather, you know. They were there as Zainab was there as the daughter of the head of the nation, and now she's being dragged back as a prisoner of war. So Ahlul Bayt asked for them, said, "You know, while you're taking us there, can you pass us through the battlefield? We want to say our farewell to the bodies that were laid on the ground." And so the enemy soldiers dragged them through the battlefield. And as Sayyidah Zainab and Kulthum started to see the bodies of their loved ones on the ground with the heads severed already, they just had bodies left there, and so Sayyidah Zainab started to kind of mourn Hussein in a very soft voice, in a very sad voice. بِأَبِي مَنْ فِسْطَاطُهُ مُقَطَّعُ الْعُرَى. He was reciting these beautiful words, "Oh, one who has died thirsty. Oh, one who is not wounded so we can heal him. He's not away so we can bring him back. Oh, brother who has died with his beard soaked in his own blood." And she was saying these words, and then Sukain, the historian, asked her, "Amma, auntie, who are you talking to?" She said, "I'm talking to your father, Hussein." And then when they got close to the body of Hussein, Sukaina threw herself from her camel on the body of Hussein, hugged him, and she was crying. And then Umar ibn Sa'd gave an order, said, "Pull her away." And then you can imagine Sukaina is being dragged away from her own father's body by thugs. They were dragging her to put her back and take her as a prisoner with them. And then, on the way, as they headed to Kufa, there were people that came to support Hussein, but they were a bit too late. They're known as Banu Asad. So they came in, found bodies there. They came in to bury them because Umar ibn Sa'ad buried his own soldiers and left the family of Hussein and Hussein on the ground. They came in, but they thought to themselves, what do we do? All we see is a bunch of bodies here. There are no faces, there are no names, we don't really know who these people are. How do we recognize them if somebody comes to us and says, who are these people? Who's buried here? Who's buried there? And in those moments, Imam Zayn al-Abidin returns from Kufa. And then they, with the help of Imam Zayn al-Abidin, he tells them to bury Hussein here. He buried him himself, to bury Ali al-Akbar next to him, to bury the companions of Imam al-Hussein separately. And then they told him, there is a body that's a bit far away from here. We found it close on the direction of the river. A body, whenever we tried to take a piece from it, to bring it here, another piece falls off. We didn't know what to do with it. He told them, yes, that's the body of Abbas. And Abbas deserves a special grave, separate. So that when you go to Karbala, you go to Hussein, then you go to Abbas. And then he buried Al-Abbas there separately. And then as Ahlul Bayt approached Kufa, they were being asked by the random people who didn't know who they are, who are you, which type of prisoners are you? And Sayyidah Zainab replied, we are the prisoners of Muhammad. We are the prisoners of the Prophet and the family of the Prophet. And then people started to cry and weep. And historians say there was no day like that day in Kufa. How much crying and mourning, and that was the first time that the whole community gathered to cry for Hussein. Then they were taken to the palace of the governor of Kufa, Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad. In the palace of Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad, he was gloating. He put the head of Hussein in front of him, the severed head of Hussein, and he had a rod, and he was hitting it with his whip. He was whipping the face of Hussein, and the family of Ahlul Bayt could see this. A man by the name of Zayd ibn Arqam said, lift your whip. He was one of the companions of the Prophet. He said, I personally have seen the face of the Prophet on this face. I've seen the lips of the Prophet kissing this face myself. Stop doing what you're doing. And then Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad continued. He said, I'll tell you even worse. I remember hearing the Prophet telling to the nation, the Muslim nation, and praying to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that I leave this family, O Allah and O people, I leave this family, entrust you with them. How have you kept the trust of the Prophet, Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad? This way, by treating the friend of Hussein this way. And then Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad turns to Sayyidah Zainab and says, Zainab, how have you seen the work of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? How have you seen how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has humiliated you and killed you? And she said, I haven't seen anything except beauty. With the confidence of Zainab and the sadness of Zainab, she said, I haven't seen anything except beauty. These are people that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has written death upon them. So they walk to it, and on the day of judgment, you will be held accountable, and we'll see who's the winner then. Then he looks towards Ali ibn al-Hussein Zayn al-Abidin, the governor of Kufa. He says, who is this man? He tells him, I am Ali ibn al-Hussein. He says, didn't Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala kill Ali ibn al-Hussein? So Ali Zayn al-Abidin looks down and says, I had a brother by the name of Ali ibn al-Hussein. He was killed by the people, your people. And then Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad says, no, it was killed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Imam Zayn al-Abidin challenges him. So the governor of Kufa orders the murder of Imam Zayn al-Abidin. And then Sayyidah Zainab interferes and stands in the way and says, if you're going to kill him, you have to kill me with him. And then he orders for the family of Hussein to be sent to an area close to the palace. That was their prison where they would be kept. So now the family of Hussein are prisoners next to the palace of the killer of Hussein. And so Sayyidah Zainab gives an order. She says no Arab woman is allowed to enter this place unless she has been a prisoner of war. Unless she is somebody who's gone through a similar ordeal to our ordeal. Because she would understand. And then people, some of the Kufans kept coming to Ahlul Bayt And then they would start those mourning sessions close to the palace and in the prison in Kufa. Then Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad ordered for the severed head of Hussein to be taken around the streets of Kufa so that everybody could see it. And they would drag in the streets and show it around to everybody. And then people gradually started to see Hussein and continued to cry and mourn Hussein. So they sent the family of Ahlul Bayt to Damascus, to Yazid. So they had another journey to put up with, and they were dragged. Imam Zayn al-Abidin was tied. His hands were tied to his neck, and he was bleeding from his hands, from his wrists, from his neck, all the way to Damascus. As they approached Damascus, they asked the thugs that were taking them to move the heads away from the tent, from the caravan. They said, people are staring at us, humiliating us. If you move the heads away, that way, they'll be busy staring at the severed heads. They put them in spears and put them in front. And then we would be it would be less invasive for us. People are looking less at us. And then, in spite of that, they did the opposite. They actually spread the heads amongst the family of Ahlul Bayt, so they could be hurt even more, so they could be humiliated even more. A man by the name of Sahel ibn Sa'd al-Sa'idi, he was one of the Prophet's companions. He said, I was in Damascus that day. I was surprised to see a celebration that I never heard of. I said, is there a Eid? Is there a happy day in Damascus that I'm not aware of? I see people celebrating. What is going on? And people told him, do you know what is going on? The family of Hussein is being dragged here, and the head of Hussein is here. And I said, which way are they coming? They told him through a door, known as the door of the clocks. So he headed there, and he says, I see a face that was so much like the face of the Prophet that I remember. But it was bloodied, and it was held on a spear, and it was held high up, being dragged through that door. And he went to Imam Zayn al-Abidin and spoke to him and the family of Ahlul Bayt. And they told him how much pain they have gone through. In the palace of Yazid, Imam Zayn al-Abidin said to Yazid, what do you think the Prophet would say if he sees us tied this way with ropes connecting all of us to each other and our hands to our necks? Do you think he would be pleased with you? Then, in that gathering, in that place, a man looks at Fatima bint al-Hussein. She was 11, the daughter of Hussein, with the family of Ahlul Bayt, and she says, he doesn't know who she is, says, that girl, I want her as a slave, give her to me. I want to take her to my house as a slave. And then Fatima bint al-Hussein says, I looked to my aunt Zainab and said, is this going to happen to me after all this? Now I'm going to be a slave in somebody's house? And then Sayyidah Zainab said, no, this will not happen to you. And then she challenged Yazid and challenged the man to do so. And then the guy found out who she was, and he himself repented. Then Yazid put the head of Hussein in front of him. He took a rod that he had and he was playing with the face of Hussein. He was showing his revenge. He was showing how much he wanted to humiliate Hussein, and the family of Ahlul Bayt were behind him. Historians say Sukaina and Fatima, the daughters of Hussein, were trying to reach out just to see the face of Hussein. They haven't seen that face. It was ahead of them for a while, and they really missed their own father. And as they were doing this, Yazid were trying to block them from seeing it, until they saw it and they screamed, Father Hussein! Hussein! And then the family of Ahlul Bayt and Sayyidah Zainab and Kulthum, and all of them were mourning in that situation with the face of Hussein, with the head of Hussein in front of them. Then Sayyidah Zainab gave her famous speech, brave speech in the palace of Yazid. She challenged him with the confidence of somebody worthy of that situation to be the carrier of the message of Hussein. Then Yazid ordered the head of Hussein to be put outside the palace for 3 days so that everybody could see it. And then, days later, Yazid would sit in the mosque, in the Grand Mosque of Damascus. He would sit there and would receive people, and the head of Hussein is positioned there so that everybody could see what he's done, and he's so proud of it. One day Imam Zayn al-Abidin, people didn't know who these people were to some extent. Imam Zayn al-Abidin asked to give a speech. And Imam Zayn al-Abidin gave a speech in that day, demonstrating to the people who he was. He started to say, I am the son of the Prophet, I am the son of Mecca, I'm the son of Medina. If you don't know who I am, this is me, this is me. Hamza is my uncle, Ja'far is my uncle, Ali ibn Abi Talib is my grandfather. And then he got to this part, saying, I am the son of the person who was murdered thirsty in Karbala. I'm the son of somebody whose family has been dragged as prisoners of war through the towns and cities. And then people, even the people of Damascus, were weeping for Ahlul Bayt. Then Yazid, to just control the situation, ordered a person to stand up and recite adhan to interrupt the Imam. So the Imam stood there until he said, Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. Imam Zayn al-Abidin said, Yazid, who is this Muhammad? Is he my grandfather or your grandfather? If he is my grandfather, why would you do this to his household? Why would you do this to us, treat us as prisoners of war and kill us? At that time, Yazid started to lose control of the situation, and he told Ahlul Bayt they can go back home to Medina. Imam Zayn al-Abidin asked for all the heads, the 7 heads of Ahlul Bayt, to be taken back with him. And they asked to go back en route to Karbala. They said, we want to go back and say our farewell. We want to go to Karbala, and they arrived on the day of Arbaeen, a day like this, which is why now so many millions are in Karbala. So on their way to Karbala, when as they began to arrive, there were people. There was Jabir ibn Abdullah al-Ansari, a companion of the Prophet, and there were some of the Ahlul Bayt, others who were in Medina from the relatives of Imam al-Hussein who weren't with him, whom he told to stay away from the battle. They had come in all the way to Karbala. And then Ahlul Bayt coming from Damascus, and with the 7 heads with them, and the others were there, and they gathered in Karbala and mourned Imam al-Hussein. And Sayyidah Zainab, historians say, would go from grave to grave. She had a connection to every single one of them. She would sit next to the grave of Hussein and say, Hussein, let me tell you what happened to us. Hussein, when we were here last time, you were with us, you were guiding us, you were leading us. Now we've brought your head back with us. And let us tell you all the journey and all the pain. And she would go into the grave of Al-Abbas alayhi salam and say, Abbas, I never got a chance to say goodbye to you before I left. I never said my farewell to you, and now I am here next to you. And then the mother of Ali al-Akbar, and the mother of Al-Qasim, and even the mother of Abdullah al-Radhi, the 6-month-old baby. You could imagine her sitting there saying, you know what, I could nurse you now. We've had some water now. She still wants her child now. You were 6 months perhaps, you might be 7 months now. And she would want to hold that baby, but the baby is gone. And Ahlul Bayt remained in that situation, crying and mourning for 3 days. And then Imam Zayn al-Abidin said, let us go, let's continue our journey to Medina. And so they would have to say goodbye now, but say goodbye in a different way. This is farewell to graves. Farewell to this is now the 2nd time they're in Karbala after being there first, having lost so much. And now they're heading back to their homes, heading back without those people they left with. Imagine returning home without all the loved ones, without all the people going to their homes and their rooms and the rest of the family that was remaining in Medina to tell them the ordeal they had gone through. Imam Zayn al-Abidin was telling Jabir in that situation in Karbala, he was saying, Jabir, هَهُنَا وَاللَّهِ قُتِلَتْ رِجَالُنَا. Jabir, indeed here, our men were slaughtered, our children were killed, Our women were taken prisoners of war. Our tents were burned. And these events had a huge impact in the heart and mind of Imam Zayn al-Abidin for years to come. And he spent the next 20 years crying for what happened. As they moved to Medina, before they arrived in Medina, Imam Zayn al-Abidin sent somebody to make an announcement. He said, go to Medina ahead of us. Go and tell them that we've come back. Go and make an announcement. So this guy says, I rode on my horse and ran to Medina, and at the top of my voice said, Ya Ahl Yathrib, la muqama lakum biha, O the inhabitants of Medina, you have no stay here. Qutil al-Hussein, Hussein has been killed. And he says, I'm saying at the top of my voice, Hussein has been killed, Hussein has been killed. And people were asking me which direction they're coming. Some were heading in that direction. And there was this lady. This lady kept asking me, tell me about Hussein, what happened to Hussein? I'm thinking, I've been saying, Qutil al-Hussein, and she's asking me. I said, who is she? They told me she's al-Baneen. She's the wife of Imam Ali. She's the mother of Abbas and his brothers. And so I said, well, she's lost sons. Let me tell her about her sons. And I said, al-Baneen, عظم الله لك الأجر. And he started with her children. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward you for the loss of your son. And he started to name them one after the other, from the youngest to kind of reduce the blow. And she kept saying, tell me about Hussein. And he says, عظم الله لك الأجر, until he got to Al-Abbas. She was carrying a child. He was by the name of Abdullah ibn al-Abbas. He was the son of Al-Abbas. She was carrying him on her shoulder, and he said, عظم الله لك الأجر بأبي الفضل العباس. I'm telling you that your son Al-Abbas has been killed. Historians say the little baby slipped from her shoulder, and she said, have I asked you about Abbas? I'm asking you about Hussein. Tell me what happened to Hussein. I said, عظم الله لك الأجر بأبي عبد الله. عظم الله لك الأجر بأبي عبد الله الحسين. And then she cried. She fell to the ground crying. And this al-Baneen was infamous for years later. She would go to the graveyard of Al-Baqi'. If you've been to Medina, you know where it is. She would go there and recite poetry. Even some of the enemies used to sit next to her and cry. She would say, لا تدعوني ويك al-Baneen. Don't call me the mother of the boys. She was known as the mother of the boys. She had 4 sons. Don't call me the mother of the boys. I had boys in the past, but I don't have boys anymore. And she would take with her the son of Al-Abbas. لا تدعوني ويك al-Baneen تذكريني باليوث العريق. And then the people of Medina ran in the direction of Al-Imam Zayn al-Abidin, all the way to receive them where they were coming from. And then Bishr, the guy who came and made the announcement, says, I was heading back, and by the time I got there, I saw Zayn al-Abidin coming. And he was surrounded by Ahlul Bayt, those who remained there, Banu Hashim, surrounded by the companions and their families, and everybody was mourning. And no day in Medina was like that, except the day when the Prophet passed away in Medina. And then Ahlul Bayt would have to go back to their own houses to see the rooms of Hussein and his household, to see the rooms of Ali al-Akbar and Qasim, and all of them are empty. Years later, Imam Zayn al-Abidin would cry. He would go to buy some meat. He would see butchers, and he would ask them, you have a style, you butchers, you give water to an animal before you slaughter it. They say, yes, we do that. And he says, you know what? My father Hussein was slaughtered thirsty. He was never offered water. Just like a lamb, just like a sheep, but he was never offered water. And he would cry. Anything that resembled the events of Karbala would break the Imam Zayn al-Abidin's heart. Years later, he was crying. One of his companions says to him, O son of the Prophet, this is your legacy. Being martyred is your legacy. This is your honor. Look at your forefathers. They've all been killed. This is something that you're used to. Isn't it enough crying? He says to him, you're right. It is our legacy to be killed and to die for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But have you heard of our women and children being dragged in the cities, prisoners of war, before the day of Ashura. والله ما نظرت إلى عماتي وأخواتي إلا وتذكرت فرارهن يوم عاشورا. I have never looked at my aunts and my sisters without remembering them running out of the tents on the day of Ashura. And the tents are burning and the soldiers are shouting, burn the tents of the Hussein. And then that image remained with Imam Zayn al-Abidin and remained in the minds of Ahlul Bayt for years and years to come. And they instituted gatherings like these, and to kind of remember their suffering, to commemorate, and to be proud of their achievements and what they have done. My brothers, my sisters, the sadness of this day is overwhelming. But this day happened as part of something bigger. Ahlul Bayt had to suffer because Hussein, even those who told Imam al-Hussein when he was heading on the way to Kufa, they told him, why are you taking women and children with you? He had this conversation with a couple of people, including his brother Muhammad ibn al-Hanafiyyah. He said, why are you going? You will be killed. He said, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has willed to see me murdered. He said, why are you taking women and children? He said, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has decided to see them as prisoners of war so they can convey, the conclusion is that so they can convey the message of Hussein. They could preserve the memory of Hussein. So that so many centuries later, you and I can sit here, remember, learn, reflect, and commemorate, and assert our attachment, our support of the message of Hussein. We are here because we believe in a legacy, we believe in a message, we believe in an ideal that was delivered by Hussein on that day, very successfully. And we are here because of the blessings that have come from that day. My brothers, my sisters, let us pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with these memories and these tears and these thoughts, that He may give us the guidance, the clarity to continue this path, to use this as a source of energy that whatever challenges we face in our lives, we remember the challenges these great people faced and learn from their example and use them as role models. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala may support us, guide us, count us, include us amongst those who would have been on the side of Hussein had they been on that day. And that He would hasten the return of our Imam and give us the opportunity to fight on his side, to be with him, to be amongst his companions. The Imam of our time, Imam al-Mahdi Ajjallahu Farajah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept all your deeds and grant you all your wishes, all your prayers, especially those amongst us here today. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون والعاقبة للمتقين. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على